If you answered yes to more than 3 of these questions, you might want to read on, or listen on, actually. I did all this and some. For the longest time, I couldn't feel my emotional psychic pain because I could not acknowledge. For the longest time, I could not feel your emotional or psychic pain because I could not acknowledge nor feel my own. This kept me separate from everyone. I believe somehow I thought I was safe. But a dear friend noticed I was walled off, and she challenged me to tell my whole story. Upon hearing this, I felt the walls falling quickly and painfully. I have felt your pain, and despite my progress, still feel them today. Feel it today. I know what you're going through, trying to get off sugar or dealing with diabetes or other conditions. Or you just simply need to stop overeating, because I went through a similar process. I went through the pain of giving up overeating and of finding I was addicted to processed, non-nutritive sugars and sweets. This is my story. If you can relate, please take whatever is useful from it for yourself. I grew up in a home where there was abandonment, violence, stealthy unsaid truths, emotional silence, where my parents tried to love me, but they did not, they could not, and would not keep me, their only child at the time, from great emotional pain and brutal violence. By age five, I had witnessed in close proximity several murders. When I tried to cry about it, I was explicitly told by the perpetrators that if I made any show of this violence emotionally or at home, that I, along with my parents, would be butchered. So, from a very early age, I learned it was vital, literally, to shut down my emotional responses to the world. The only safe place was to think things through in my head. It never traveled to my gut. For inside my gut, hidden from view, but not from my reaction to the world, lay the violence that I believe to be at the heart of every human experience. From age 5, I believed or felt on a subconscious level that violence lurked, that nowhere was really safe, and that violence could reach any portion and every portion of my life. This was reinforced when at age 8, I was throttled by a trusted adult who attempted to choke me. So at that point, I learned it was not safe to trust outsiders, as they would do violence to you, and that the people protecting you from the very violence inside your family were in fact doing violence in the family. This was reinforced by my periodic beatings with the belt. Since it was not safe to escape inside my emotions, and since it was not okay to talk about these things, I retreated inside my head, where I invented worlds actually, made up stories, and eventually came to rely upon as the truth of the world. No matter how untrue the story, it was better to have a belief that did not rely on the outside world. I learned there were ways to eat in the world that would ensure my emotions were kept in check. Primarily, I learned that if I ate sufficient quantities of sugary, generally chocolatey snacks, I could find comfort and release from the pain. When I ate fatty, sugary, chocolatey desserts, I felt immediately calmed down. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I had found a way that allowed me to suppress those very difficult feelings. So instead of crying all the time, which is what I felt like doing, or sleeping all the time, which I also felt like doing, I could increase my sugary intake so that I would feel a brief period of elation. I always forgot that those feelings of high were always followed, always, with a depressing low, often far longer and more severe than the high had been. Correspondingly, in the connection unknown to me at the time, I craved dense meats and salty substances, beef jerky, for example. I made no connection between seeking out those contractive foods and the expansion and the sense of freedom that sugar addiction seemed to allow me. I started out eating sugar, generally overeating, because I liked the feeling of the rush of initial blood sugar in my brain. I felt relieved. It was like I was home. In a home where things were safe and orderly. My brain and overtaxed adrenals could relax, at least for a while. But what was for a long time a comfort came back to become something I couldn't live without. I gained weight, felt terrible about my pot belly, was on the border of diabetes myself, felt embarrassed about my oversized thighs, felt horrified about my increasingly woman-like breasts, but I was defeated because my brain constantly told me, it's okay, just this one time. Where my body grew dependent upon the constant cycle of binge depression. Oh yeah, and I tried every faddish diet out there, even some drugs. Doctor ordered drugs, of course. I would lose weight for a while, but always return to the comfort of eating sugar and overeating when any major thing came along. For example, the 600 calorie diet, which included running 5 miles a day, losing 50 pounds in 2 months. I felt invisible until I had to have my wisdom teeth removed. Then the simple thought, I can just have liquid foods because liquids won't put on any weight. They just go through my system like water. So I had chocolatey snacks, shakes, heavy and sugary drinks, chocolate sundaes and smoothies. After all, they were liquid. They couldn't possibly put on any solid weight. I really thought that. But the sugar took over, and as soon as I was back to the same or more weight than before. I had many wardrobes of friends of clothes, each for a different weight. Kind of friends too, actually. I hated myself. I hated thin people. I hated food. I wanted to die, but I was too timid to do anything about it. My self-esteem was so low I could only mumble my answers to conversations. I couldn't look you in the eye. I was a wreck. I had no way out. In the middle of this, I also drank a bit too much. Let's just say the only reason for me to drink alcohol was to get drunk and pass out. I drank to become socially acceptable, to find the ease and comfort of being less anxious in social circumstances. I didn't drink all the time, only when I had a social occasion to prepare for it with groups of people. Well, turns out 3 of my 4 grandparents had died in their mid-30s from heart attacks. So it was with alarm and concern I noticed I was having heart palpitations in my early 30s. I also had elevated blood sugar with pre-diabetic diagnosis. I was on the fast track to type 2 diabetes. To add to my dilemma, I experienced terrible mood swings and was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I'd exacerbate the swings of that disease by eating a lot of sweets, drinking a lot of artificially sweetened soft drinks, eat heavy meats and proteins. Altogether, between the chemicals in my brain and the mood-changing food sweet choices I was making, I was in the hospital all the time during my early 20s and early 30s, even mid-20s, late 20s, 20s. The cycles of mania followed by depression were being reinforced, perhaps even activated by my food choices. It was a miserable time. When most of my peers were building a career, I was careening between being miserably fat and depressed or dangerously high and manic. Now, physically, I had arthritis in both my feet. As a consequence of misuse, had knee surgery on both knees. The bottom of both my feet had no padding between the bone and pavement. I was constantly short of breath, was anxious, and didn't sleep very well or long. Was constantly tired. I couldn't focus on one topic for more than a few minutes. In my early 30s, it got so bad I joined a food support group and ran into a woman who changed my life forever. At that time, I was living in Boston and having constant colds. This woman and I were walking one day and talking, and I mentioned this to her. She looked at me and said, I haven't had a cold in 10 years, not even the sniffles. I was incredulous. What did you do? She told me about a book she read, which had changed her way of thinking about her relationship of food to her body, and specifically to the natural cycles of energy in the world. Science. I was fascinated. I ran out and bought the book and any other book I could find on the subject and read them just the same way a dying person would hang on to a life preserver. I literally consumed those books. I began to do what the literature advised me to, essentially eating simply, to know which food creates what type of energy, and to choose food consciously based upon these principles. I did this. I became a voracious reader of that material, took classes, went to 2 institutes, and began to heal. No longer was I at all overweight. No longer did I have sugar cravings. No longer was I suicidally depressed. And coincidentally, my bipolar episodes went from 1 every year to 1.5 years to 1 every 10 to 15 years. In short, my life was restored. Oh yeah, and physically I was restored to vibrant health. These days, I run between 3 to 10 miles every other day. At 60, I ran my first marathon, a practice which I continue to this day. A decade later, I'm 70. I am pain-free in my feet, ankles, and lower back. I have enough energy and focus to have written 26 books, with 3 more at least halfway done. All this from a hopelessly fat, chronically depressed bipolar with a traumatic childhood. Yeah, and one who couldn't stop eating sugar even for 1 day. I used to go into stores and say, I'll pay you $5 if you won't sell me chocolate. Nobody would do it though. They were not fools. If I can do it, I know you can too. Wherever you are, whatever point you start at, I have been at a similar point. I have, and I do feel your pain. I'm just like you. I learned that what I want to share with you. It's a path that can restore vitality and hope to your life, the same way it did for me. Come with us on this adventure. Watch the check marks evaporate off the questionnaire you filled at the beginning. Witness the rebirth of hopefulness, of knowing that your dreams, like mine, can come true. Come on, let's start this miracle together.